Trump came into office and said he's going to have this war over within a day. And we don't appear to be any closer to getting this thing over, even to get a partial ceasefire actually implemented than we were before. There are growing evidences that Russia is preparing some kind of larger scale operation offensive than they've been doing, maybe in the Sumy and in Zaporizhia area in the south, maybe even in the Kupiansk area. If Russia, because they don't trust us, calculates that, all right, we're not going to get what we want with diplomacy that we can trust, so we're just going to get it militarily. And they just say, all right, we're going to continue on and increase our capacity. And then it turns out that they end up just taking by force what they want. That's going to leave Trump in a position to where he's come in and talked about this deal maker, and then now he appears to be impotent on making anything happen here, and the Russians are just going to roll down, which could be a tremendous psychological blow to the entire West, NATO and Europe, in that we were impotent to defeat Russia the first time or to stop them from gaining what they want on the battlefield the second time. How would that play into this larger area of lack of trust that you talked about?
What you're saying is that the Ukrainians will lose the war in an obvious way. It will be impossible for the diehards to even make the case that Ukraine is holding the line. And it will be impossible for them to deny that the Russians are either on the verge of victory or have won. I think in that case, Trump will be blamed. It will be analogous, Danny, to what happened to Biden in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Remember, it was Trump who decided to get out of Afghanistan. It's just that he kicked the can down the road so that it landed in Biden's lap, and Biden actually pulled out, and Biden was crucified for what happened in Afghanistan. And I think what will happen here is Trump will be crucified for what's happening in Ukraine in the scenario that you described. And I think that will be a huge problem for Trump, because he will certainly be taking flack over the tariffs. I mean, there's no question about that. If you marry that to him taking flack over Ukraine in the scenario that you described, oh man. But I still think that the really interesting question is what happens if Trump gets into a war with Iran? One can tell a story where the economic, put aside the tariffs, just put it completely aside. One can tell a story where if we get into a major war with Iran, this has huge negative consequences on the world economy, because the Iranians end up shutting down the flow of oil out of places like the Persian Gulf. The Iranians may target oil fields and oil terminals in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Coast states, and that would have terrible consequences, to put it mildly, for the international economy. So It would seem to me, given the tariff policy that he's now put forward, the incentives are not to start a war with Iran.
Man, you think that was the case. And by the way, I mean, you're talking about the elements of a potential, a perfect storm all moving around here. And if anybody thinks that that's theoretical, this was just yesterday in the Oval Office with Benjamin Netanyahu.
We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen.
Listen, John, if anybody thinks, okay, he's just talking and is kind of around the edges, well, one of the reporters in the room point blank asked him, if diplomacy fails, then what?
A lot of people think that those talks are not going to lead anywhere because the Iranians will never give up.
Sure. I think that's a possibility too.
If diplomacy fails, is the United States, under your leadership, ready to take military action to destroy the Iranian nuclear program and remove this threat?
I think if the talks aren't successful with Iran, I think Iran is going to be in great danger. And I hate to say it, great danger, because they can't have a nuclear weapon.
So is that a yes?
You know, it's not a complicated formula. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That's all there is.
So
can't have it.
Ready?
Right now we have countries that have nuclear power that shouldn't have it. But I'm sure we'll be able to negotiate out of that too as part of this later on down the line. But Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And if the talks are successful, I actually think it'll be a very bad day for Iran if that's the case. Yeah.
What worries me about many things worry me about it, but one is, it's just not complicated. They just can't have a nuclear weapon, except they don't have a nuclear weapon. And according to even the Mossad, to the CIA, they have not started a nuclear weapons program. They've continued to escalate their capacity should they make that decision. That's true, but they don't have a nuclear weapon. So the terms that's been reported is what Trump's ultimatum letter on the 19th of March said. You have to dismantle your nuclear power capability and research, et cetera, the ability to reprocess and all that kind of stuff. And they have to curtail their missile capacity here, which would basically be saying you have to completely remove all of the chance that you have to defend yourself and then trust us with your security. If that's the objective and they don't meet the objective, then apparently there's going to be war. How do you see this thing folding out?
What's at issue here is the enrichment and reprocessing capability. The reason that the Israelis and the Trump administration didn't like the JCPOA is because it allows Iran to enrich uranium. And the Israelis and the Americans want that capability completely taken away. The problem is the Iranians did not agree to that back when the JCPOA was being negotiated, and they're not going to agree to it now. The question is, where does that leave Trump? And your point is, he really, given his rhetoric, doesn't have any choice but to turn to bombing. And then we get into the whole issue of where that leads, especially in terms of the fact that we have this problem with regard to Ukraine now, and we have these tariffs and so forth and so on. It does kind of look like the perfect storm. I kind of find it hard to believe that he would actually start a war with Iran, given what's going on with these tariffs. But if he does, the consequences could be even worse than we're seeing with the tariffs. Danny, I'd like to just make a quick set of comments to you about Trump, just about the whole Iran issue and what you said about Trump saying he could shut down the Ukraine war even before he came into office or one day in office. I think what Trump doesn't understand is that the world is incredibly complicated, and dealing with problems like Ukraine and the Iran nuclear program and dealing with China are not easy issues to deal with. At the same time, Trump thinks he's a genius, and he does not respect expertise. And a really good example of this is that he has this guy, Steve Witkoff, who is his principal point person on dealing with Russia, on dealing with the Middle East, to include Netanyahu, and to include the Iranians. He's got three portfolios: Iran, Israel, and Russia. This is a man who has no diplomatic experience. He's not seasoned diplomatically. He's not studied these issues over the years. He's just a good friend of Trump. And he's obviously a very smart and competent man in the real estate world. Would you take a real estate mogul and put him out there to deal with three very complicated problems? I don't think so. You'd want really smart people around who really knew the issues, so that you could figure out the best possible way, maybe the least bad alternative for dealing with these complicated issues. But this isn't the way Trump operates. Trump thinks these are simple problems to solve. He basically knows how to solve them. And all he has to do is, get one or two people into positions of power who will work with him, and they'll fix these problems. And then he can point all these second-rate and third-rate people to other positions, and it really doesn't matter. I think this is a prescription for disaster. And I think if you look at what's going on with the Trump administration, this attitude of his explains a lot of where we're headed.
There's one more element in the decision-making process for Trump here, which I don't think should be overlooked. And that was the guy sitting right next to him, Benjamin Netanyahu, is putting lots of pressure on him. I think it was a month and a half or so ago, there was a big headline which we've used several times where Netanyahu said he wants to finish the job in Iran using Trump's plan. So he said back then. And I'm going to show you something here. This is actually from 6 months ago from former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. But I think that what he said here is very widely agreed to on the Israeli government.
We have the legitimacy more than ever. We have the ability more than ever. Iran is at its most advanced point in history. It's acquired uranium in an amount for 10 nuclear bombs. This is crazy. They're building the bomb already, the bomb itself. So we're in the 11th hour. I would say strike the nuclear facilities, strike the regime. Don't be afraid. The Israeli nation stands behind you.
This is despite caution from the Americans.
That's correct.
It sure seems that that's the idea of a lot of people, especially the guy who's currently the prime minister. How do you see the pressure from Israel on Trump?
Danny, as I've long argued, Israel is a strategic liability for the United States. It's an albatross around our neck. The reason we're fighting the war in Yemen now is because of Israel. The Houthis have come to the defense of the Palestinians who are a victim of a genocide in Gaza. And we are fighting the Houthis on behalf of Israel. The New York Times reported yesterday that military leaders in the United States have concluded that our war against the Houthis and our deployments in the Middle East are sapping our ability to contain China and East Asia. This is just all evidence of what a liability at the strategic level Israel is. And now we have this situation where they want us to attack Iran. And by the way, in April of last year, this is April 2024, and in October 2024, the Israelis tried to bait the Biden administration into a war with Iran. Why didn't the Biden administration enter a war with Iran? Because it's not in our strategic interest. Here we are again with the Israelis playing games with us, trying to get us into a war that is not in our interest. But this is nothing new. Fortunately, the Biden administration played this one smartly, and we avoided a war. Trump, I believe, deep down wants to avoid a war. And as we were talking about 5 minutes ago, the incentives for him now to avoid a war are greater than ever. So I think there is a reasonably good chance that we will avoid a war. But it won't be because the Israelis are helping us to avoid that war.
Right.
It will be in spite of the fact that the Israelis are pushing us really hard to get into a war that is not in the American national interest. And of course, all of their minions here in the United States will be working overtime to help push us into this losing proposition.